Matteau swoops in to intercept. Matteau behind the net. Swings it in front. He scores! Matteau! 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 Stéphane Matteau! And the Rangers have one more hill to climb, baby!
As most people know, I am a lifelong New York Ranger fan. I started watching the Rangers in their 71-72 season. So that's going back. And as a Ranger fan, you get used to disappointment.
Yeah.
But in 1994, that obviously all changed. And I am honored, as is Dan, to have Stéphane Matteau with us on the On the Tape podcast. It's an absolute honor to have you. Thanks for joining us, Steph.
Thanks for having me. It's my honor. Thank you.
Well, so you know the name, I know, but Pete Stemkowski in 71 scored 2 overtime goals in the Stanley Cup Finals. At that point, I think it was the 3rd or 4th overtime, that goal that he scored against the Blackhawks was the most famous goal in Ranger history until you came along. And let's talk about how you came along, because that 93-94 Ranger team was a very good hockey team. But, the head coach, who we can talk about, Mike Keenan, he wasn't happy with the team. He was happy with how they were winning, but he didn't think they were playoff ready. And he was riding Neil Smith to make some trades. Now, I will tell you, as an Italian-American, I loved Tony Amonte. He was young. The kid could play, played with energy. He was a goal scorer. But in order to get something, you need to give something away. So when I read that the Rangers had just traded Tony Amonte to the Chicago Blackhawks for Stéphane Matteau, who I knew, and Brian Noonan, who I sort of knew of, I'm like, holy shit, they're going all in here. I don't know if I like this trade, but that, as a typical Ranger fan, and I'm sure you probably heard it as well, they gave up everybody's love affair with Tony Amonte for 2 guys that were not necessarily goal scorers, but guys that were going to do the necessary work to win hockey games. Thoughts on that?
100% right. They gamble. That was a huge gamble. Tony was a 40-goal scorer for many, many years. A lot of respect for the guy. And I played because Keenan coached us in Chicago prior. And we lost in the Stanley Cup Finals in 1992 to Pittsburgh. So he knew what type of character we had. So it took a lot of guts and a lot of because Neil Smith didn't want to make those trades.
No.
They were running high. They were first in the league. And we played them a few weeks before, and they were the best team in the league.
They were the best team in the league, but we've seen it before with Ranger teams. Great in the regular season, but as we're learning now, the postseason is an entirely different animal. So they needed to bring the grit that you and Brian Noonan brought in with you. Without question, I will tell you, as important as that trade was, they made a trade prior to get Steve Larmer, who is a buddy of yours as well. And I don't think people realize what he brought to that team. Steve Larmer, again, you give up a Mike Gartner, who was a 50-goal scorer.
700 goals plus in his career.
Think about that. Mike Keenan did not like Mike Gartner for whatever reason. I guess he didn't think he had, again, grit, the toughness. He was a great regular season player, but you were not going to win a Stanley Cup with Mike Gartner. So I'm sitting back and watching this shit. I'm like, oh, my God, they better win something this year, because they traded some real studs to get these guys.
Well, we a lot of pressure on us, but we didn't have the social media back then to read all those the stuff that we read today. So they put me in a position to succeed.
Yeah.
I remember they traded Craig McTavish and Glenn Anderson also. We had like 5 new players coming into the locker room the very next night in Calgary. So. No, we knew where we were going. I knew exactly we were going for the Stanley Cup because they kept on talking about it. I was put on the line with Alexei Kovalev and Steve Larmer on the second line. So I was blessed. I was not lucky because I worked really hard to get to that position. But Keenan had a vision, and to his credit, I delivered pretty strong, pretty big for the New York Rangers in '94.
There's a funny story, Dan, about Alexei Kovalev, who was an ungodly talent. I mean, that guy could do things on the ice that I had never seen before. And he was one of these guys that liked to be on the ice. And there was one time where he's playing and shift change. He's not coming off the ice. Yeah. So Keenan's like, you know what? Stay out there. He had like a 4-minute shift, which is unheard of. But you know what? I don't think he realized that they were trying to sort of teach him a lesson. He probably loved it. He was a free spirit without question. but you need talented guys like that as well. I mean, he was I don't want to say a generational talent, but in terms of the league at that time, he was probably one of the 10, 15 most talented forwards in the game.
He was only 19 years old, and it was an 8-minute shift.
It was an 8-minute shift.
It was one of the longest, and Alexi kind of downplayed it, but he knew exactly he was in trouble with the coaching staff, but the coach, Keenan, kept on using him on the ice. So he was laughing, but Keenan was maybe a borderline to trade him or to send him down in the minors, but he wanted to make a statement. And that was before I got traded to the Rangers. Mm-hmm. And that was a lesson. He was only 19 years old. But you were right. He was one of the most talented player in the league, in the world, as a 19-year-old player.
We're going to talk a little bit about how we got to know each other last year. You do amazing work with underprivileged kids, and you focus on a whole host of things that I think a lot of our listeners are going to be very interested to hear about. They may not know about you, and we're going to offer them ways to support the Stéphane Matteau Foundation. But I got to tell you this, Guy and I talk stocks all day long. He is never happier than talking like this right now. So we're going to keep going deep on the hockey before we get to all that other stuff here. Just like remind us a little bit. So you get there in March of 1994. You have been on a team that has competed for the Stanley Cup final. But the New York Rangers have not won, in 50 so years? So, Guy,
1940.
Okay, 1940.
That was the chant.
So you talk about all this pressure on you. So we're at the Eastern Conference Finals. We're playing your arch rivals, or the Devils, right? And so Guy just mentioned this before we went on. Okay, you're known for the amazing, Game 7 double overtime win, but you had done that in Game 3. You had scored the game winner double overtime in Game 3. Talk to us about what just like that felt like for you. I mean, like when you think about this, in the biggest stage possible, helping this team in the biggest city, right? In champion, city, what did that mean? Like, what did that mean to you individually?
Well, to me, it was incredible, but we were surrounded by greatness in the 1994 teams. And even though we were under pressure, the Mark Messiers and the Kevin Lowe's and the Craig McTavish and all those great leaders who's been there before with the Edmonton Oilers didn't allow us to go too far ahead of our head. So we were focusing game by game. We lost in Game 1 against the Devils in double overtime. Stéphane Richer scored. And after that, it's the end of the world. Like you focus on Game 2, we won. And then we went to New Jersey. I scored my first double overtime. To me, my career was over. I was so happy at that time because I was like, you dream about those moments as a kid. You picture yourself winning the Stanley Cup, scoring the big overtime goal. You're at the World Series, hitting the home run in the 9th inning. So to me, it was pretty special. But to be put in that position in Game 7, there was a lot of drama before. Like we were so close to lose in Game 6 alone.
Yeah.
And Mark Messier delivered one of the greatest performer as a captain I've ever seen in my life. We're down, and the momentum were on the Devils in that time. We're down 2-0 after 10 minutes in the game, and Keenan called a timeout, and there was not a word said. And that's what Keenan changed some lines, and he put Kovalev with the Graves and Messier, and the magic started. Messier scored a hat-trick in Game 7. So if without Messier performance in Game 6 and Richter in Game 6, I would have never been exposed or to score that big goal in Game 7. A lot of things happened, and we talked about it earlier. If Zalipukin doesn't score with 7 seconds to go, I would not be sitting here today. So a lot of things happen, a lot of drama. That's why I believe it's the top 3 best series of all time in the National Hockey League.
No question about it. And it's funny you mentioned Valery Zalipukin because we'll talk about Game 7. But in that Game 3, he actually scored the tying goal in that game as well. That was in the second period, so not nearly as dramatic because nobody scored in the third. Meanwhile, if you think about that game, you guys put 50 shots on goal. Now, that was a goalie that obviously you knew about, but I don't think a lot of people realized what career he would go on to have because that was his rookie year. And he almost was the difference in that series. So speak about that.
Well, Marty Brodeur became the all-time, 20 years later, the all-time in the National Hockey League. They had one of the best system. People say, well, you should... the Devils, they were special. We were special in 1994. And the Devils, because of losing a big series like that, they became even stronger the following year. They won the following year. They won 2 more. And Mr. Lamorello had a very tight ship. And but enough about the Devils. They were very good. We knew that was it. That was the series. Even though I was brought in very late in the season, I knew there was the big rivalry, the Islanders and the Devils. So very fortunate I was part of that series, and I thank God we came up on top on that one.
So we'll fast forward to Game 7 because you mentioned Game 6, Messier, the night before, we will win. That's the headline in New York Post, New York Daily News. It's like all the pressures on his shoulders, which were wide enough to take that. As Ranger fans, you didn't know what to expect. And to your point, the Devils came out early and sort of, 2-zip. Then Richter stands on his head, and then you win that game. Let's talk about Game 7, because as you mentioned, you guys played really well that game. Zelpukin scores with 7 seconds left. Think about how different, and I know you've considered this, but you just talked about it, but your life would have been so different going forward if you just win that game in regulation. Nobody talks about, that famous call, Matteau, that doesn't happen unless Zelpukin scores and puts every friggin' Ranger fan in abject misery for the next hour or so as we sort of got through those overtimes, because there were a couple plays in that game where it looked like the Devils were going to win without question. There was one period where the defenseman, you just said it before, I can't think of his name. Ken Danico has his arms up on the bench in celebration of what he thought was going to be the winning goal, only to have it thwarted. So talk about how your life changes like this.
I don't know. That's where my life would be, because that's part of my life, the last 30 years. But I can tell you this, that the first 10 years after I scored a goal, I kept playing the National Hockey League, and it was really hard because I always wanted to undo yourself. You always wanted to do better. And I could not match what I accomplished in 1994, and it became a disappointment. I got traded to St. Louis. I got traded to San Jose Sharks, and they were hoping to get
same thing
as someone who, because I was called, people called me Mr. Overtime, and I could not deliver it. It took me 53 games after Game 7 to score my next playoff game. So that was it was hard. I put a lot of pressure on myself, almost to a point I was depressed, and it was really hard to match. So, but after 10 years, I retired, coming back as an alumni as a New York Rangers, and feeling the vibe from the New York Ranger fans. My life changed after 10 years.
But you have to understand that and the Ranger fans, listen, hockey fans, every franchise has amazing fan, without question. Ranger fans, I'll put them up there with anybody else. You can't walk around and you are royalty in your. No, it's Dan's laugh. It happens to be true.
True,
you see. They're probably not a day, especially this time of year, where people don't ask you talk about. As exhausting as it probably is, it has to be exhilarating at the same time.
It's the best. It's the best feeling to have a 7-year-old man come up to me and point a finger to he's telling his grandkids, this is the guy who helped us win the Stanley Cup. And he asked me, can I give you a hug? And the guy started crying in my arm, and I get it. I get the moment, but it took me 10 years to realize that moment. But now I'm a very good ambassador of that special moment we have, and it's never going to go away. But this is surreal to walk around Madison Square Garden. I'm 40 pounds overweight. I have no hair left on my head. Totally different man, but I'm people recognize me more and more, and because it's like the Beatles out there. We're one of the 23 men out there who won the Stanley Cup in the last 84 years alone, and I get that. We are people see me at the Garden. They remind me, but they're amazing. Last night I was in Brooklyn to a restaurant, and I was taking pictures with strangers on the street in Brooklyn. So that's my life now, and I cherish it, and I don't want that to go away at all.
It's funny. I was at Game 2 with you versus the Caps in between like first and second period, and there were two groups of young men who came up to him that were not born in 1994. Okay, and I remember how gracious you were with both of them, and it was like they were going up and meeting, I don't know, like Michael Jordan or something like that. And you are very gracious about it, and it means a lot to these fans. And again, this 30-year anniversary of that, it seems like The season's kind of rolling. Guy always says, don't touch the money. We're recording this on Monday afternoon. So the Rangers just swept the Caps.
Yeah.
How you feeling about things? Give us a little prognosis on this Ranger team as we go deeper into the playoffs.
There's no luck about it. They were, from the get-go this year, new coach, almost the same players than last year, except some addition, and they are more composed.
Mm-hmm.
They're controlling the play. Even the fans are screaming, shoot the puck. They refuse to shoot the puck if the play is to pass it across. We mentioned it earlier about Panarin. He and Zibanejad and those guys, they are world-class player, and the coach gets that. And Lafreniere's having a good season. Kako had a great game yesterday, and he has a lot of pressure, that kid. There's a lot of people who has a lot of pressure, and he played like a pro last night. And the power play is outstanding. The goaltender, even though Jonathan Quick had a very good stretch this year, while our number one goaltender, I can't even pronounce his name.
Shesterkin.
It's too hard for me to pronounce. The number one goaltender, and he's a world class. And he had maybe a 1 month off, and he was out. Quick was outstanding. So they do look like us in 1994. Adam Fox reminds me of Sergei Zubov and Brian Leetch combined. I think Adam Fox is one of the most talented player, but also one of the brightest young player in the National Hockey League. And their top players are performing, but also the third and fourth line, like our team in '94, are chipping in when it's time for them to score some goals.
I'm glad you mentioned Sergei Zubov, because somehow he gets lost in this whole thing.
Yeah.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I think in 93-94, he led the Rangers in scoring. If it wasn't that year, it was one of those years around it, which is remarkable as a defenseman. I mean, that guy could flat out play. And everybody knows Brian Leetch. I get it. His numbers in the rafters, and deservedly so. But Zubov was an incredible talent on that Ranger team, and you're not going anywhere without him on the power play.
We had the best power play. We had two defensemen moving forward and three forwards moving backward. That's how talented Leetch and Zubov were. And that's a trivia question that people will miss a lot. Who led the New York Rangers in 1994 in scoring in a regular season? It's Zubov. Graves scored 53 goals. Messier was there, Leetch, and Kovalev, but the leading scoring was Zubov, which he only had like 80 points or something. So we were well balanced, but Sergei Zubov was one of the best passer in the history of the game.
So the parallels between your team in 94 and this team in 24 are eerily similar. World-class goalie without question.
Yeah.
In terms of Richter then, Shesterkin now. Obviously, Richter won. Shesterkin still has to do that. The defenseman we just talked about. You know, you mentioned Brian Leetch and Zubov. You had some pounders as well in Bukaboom. I don't think Ryan Lindgren gets his just due. I mean, that guy is an absolute warrior. I mean, the way he plays the game, he could have played with you guys without question. And Trouba, everybody wants to hate on Trouba, which I don't necessarily understand, but he brings you a stability back there that a lot of teams would love to have.
He's become one of the best leaders in the league. People were hard on him when he first signed his big contract the first year. I remember that. But he became a very good leader. He reminds me of Bukaboom with maybe better hands, but he's a fear factor on the ice. The big number 8 is on the ice. The other teams notice that.
And now you think about some of the other guys. Now, Vincent Trocheck, last year, he played fine. I think that you can speak to this, so I'd like you to, but there's an adjustment period playing in New York without question. I think you're trying to prove yourself. Sometimes that works to your detriment. But the year that Trocheck had, again, he reminds me of the Steve Larmer of your team. Thoughts on that?
He reminds me of Larmer and Nemenchinov combined because he is as good defensively as he is offensively, and he's not that big. And I loved him when he played in Carolina in the past, and he's a huge plus because he's out there and he doesn't have any bad shifts and he controls the game on and off the ice. I heard he's a great leader in the dressing room, also calm, composed, but once he plays the game, he plays the same way at home than he plays on the road.
Rempe is an interesting story. I mean, he's a kid. He can skate for somebody his size without question. He's only going to play 5, 6, 7 minutes a game, and he understands that. But how important is it to have a guy in that team where The defensemen absolutely know he's on the ice, and they're making different plays in their zone when he's on the ice. Now, I don't want to compare him to Joe Kocur, completely different. But Joe Kocur played for those teams, and when he was out there, guys had to have their head up. Thoughts on that?
Well, Remke is one of the biggest guys in the league, and that was an incredible big hit, the one that he delivered a few games ago.
On Van Riemsdyk.
That was that kid didn't come back after that, but he knows his role. He made a statement his first game at the stadium, Giant Stadium. He started from there. And as a 21-year-old, I started in the league when I was 21 also, and that you want to do anything in your power to be noticed. And he's doing a good job, minus some penalties that he takes. But if he would have been a 5'8" player, they would say he's a cute player and he's just a strong player. Because he's so big and so tall that sometimes the elbows. But he's going to learn, because the next series against Carolina or the Islanders, he won't be able to deliver those big hits.
So, again, there's a lot of different thoughts about fighting in the NHL. I have my opinions. It doesn't matter what I think. But, if you think about what the purpose it serves, I think it forces guys to respect the game. If you take that out, guys start to take liberties, but, a different conversation. But, you just mentioned Rempe's first game was that Islander game at the Meadowlands outside. I think his second or third shift, Matt Martin turns to him and basically says, do you want to go? And walk me through that, because I think I give Matt Martin a lot of credit for giving that kid the opportunity. And Rempe talked about that.
The NHL is, even though you're playing against the Islanders or the Devils, Matt Martin realized the impact in front of 80,000, 90,000 people, and he wanted to make a statement himself. But he was in his shoe, Remke's shoe, at some point in his career, and he wanted to make a statement. I thought fighting, I think it's still part of the game. One of the best games this year when the Devils faced the Rangers in 2 seconds into the game, and people still talk about it. Not too many people gets hurt in fighting, but sometimes you need to do it to defend yourself or to get some frustration out of your system. And but that was incredible. The feeling, 80,000 people, 90,000 people still talk about it. And the game is much faster. There's less players like Remke or Joey Kocur out there, but the players they are fast. They're talented, and but the fighting is still part of the game.
All right, I'm going to let Dan in a second. So you guys, I don't know if you were one of the guys. There was an Italian restaurant in Port Chester that a lot of you guys used to go to because you practiced in Rye, New York at Playland. And there was an Italian restaurant that all the guys would go to, and I would go there from time to time. And you guys had won the cup. It was over the summer, and at one table was Joe Kocur and his wife, and another table was Glenn Healy, and I think Steve Larmer was at that table, probably 3 or 4 guys. And I remember walking up to Joe Kocur. He had finished dinner, and I just said, listen, Mr. Kocur, I just want to say thank you. And I remember looking at his hands. His right hand, his knuckles were still raw, and the season had been over for a few months. So talk about this. Hockey players, you talk about football being a collision sport, a violent sport. The NBA is a tough sport. There's nobody like hockey players. I mean, guys get hit. There was a guy last night get hit in the face with a puck. He's out, couple shift, he's back on with a visor. I mean, it happens over and over again. Just the level of commitment and the level of basically sacrifice that you guys make.
We endure the pressure and the pain. Sometimes it's a little crazy. If I could go back, maybe I would skip some games, but you don't want to give up your space. It takes you a lifetime to achieve your goal and to get to that point. You don't want to give it away. And you're part of a team. When you're on a winning team, you don't want to disappoint someone. You know, when you miss a few shifts, the coaches has to change the line. Anyway, I had some friends. Mike Ritchie got cut 3 times in one game, and he was laughing at the end of the game because he had stitches in 3 different places. I played with a broken foot one time. I was so afraid to tell Mike Keenan in Chicago that I had a broken foot. Even the trainer was afraid to tell him that I was injured. So we play with pain, but it's part of the game. And sometimes, like Steve Larmer played 800-plus game with a broken fingers, broken hands, and he didn't want to leave that streak. He wanted to beat that streak, but you go through pain, but that's the mentality of a hockey player.
Steph, let's talk a little bit. You mentioned this a couple times. It took you really 10 years to kind of come to grips, let's just say, with the success that you had in this team. There were so many stars on this team, and you were the unlikely star, right? And you're very open about that. And the way Guy just talked about those 2 double overtime, goal winning. I mean, that is just an amazing feat. So it took you 10 years to kind of really come to grips with that. You're always trying to outdo that moment. So what were some of the things that you were dealing with a little bit? Because I've gotten to know you through this Stéphane Matteau Foundation, and really you've spent now your life really giving back and kind of focusing on some of the lessons that you've learned playing at such a high level and being revered by so many people. But there's also another side to that too, when the kind of lights dim a little bit.
Well, I grew up with the anxiety attack. I grew up with disappointment. Depression, because the game of hockey, you're the greatest player on the planet one night, and the next night you're sitting on the bench, and because you didn't produce, and the ups and downs. Some players, some of my teammates, they deal with it very easily. But myself, I'd been a shy kid growing up. That's why my program, when I started in the Bronx a few years ago, that I want that the teachers and the principals were sharing with me that a lot of kids, they go through anxiety attack and the depression and the bullying. I got bullied because I had too many zits on my face at some point growing up, and I looked awkward because I was the tall, skinny kid. So, and then I started a program that I could identify myself, but also the kids can relate to an ex-professional player, and that's what it's like a group therapy. When I talk to the kids, I talk about myself. I open it up for discussion. And the kids, they raise their hand. I ask them, who has the anxiety attack? And they raise their hand. And I ask them, how do you cope with that? How do you go? So then they start helping each other, and the magic starts. So it's like a group therapy. And some days it's more, we will close the book because we don't need to go through my program. It's more important to talk and listen to what they have to share, because it's a lot of those kids in the Bronx or in New York, they don't have, at home, we find out that it's not always pretty, and I'm very sensitive about that.
Well, in many ways, the world has not changed for the better, but in terms of this, it certainly has, because if you think about when you were a young man, there was a stigma around mental health and just toughen it up. What do you have to be worried about or upset about, or why are you anxious? You're a star, but you're in the NHL, all those different things, but it affects everybody in some way, shape, or form, and I think for you to bring light to that, and somebody of your stature, it allows people to say, well, shit, if Stéphane Matteau is going through it, it's okay if I'm going through it as well. I mean, that might be more, your legacy might be more powerful on the back of that than maybe that 94 double overtime goal. Thoughts on that?
Well, it's a mix. I'm growing. I have 2 grandkids now. I'm very sensitive when I see a father and son movie. I always cry because my dad was really hard growing up. And I struggle with that because I always wanted to please him. I always wanted to perform, but I could never satisfy, even though I scored 3 or 4 goals in one game. So I'm very sensitive about what the kids are going through, and I try to level with them, and I try to just to do my best and be a good mentor to them.
You spend a lot of time. I mean, there's numerous organizations. So Meet the Moment, the Matteau Gold Club. Talk to us a little bit about. Again, there's a couple of events coming up, and we're going to put them in the show notes. And it's really, I love the fact that you're using the anniversary of this thing that everybody knows you for, okay? And obviously, you had a great career outside of just 1994, but what percentage of the players in the NHL actually win a Stanley Cup? And even smaller amount, obviously, have a game winner that launches them to the Stanley Cup. But you're using that fame and that notoriety in a city right here. Like the idea that you're up in the Bronx, it's not like it's some like massive, training ground for hockey players or whatever. What caused you to look at like the situation there and focus on these sorts of kids and those sorts of situations to kind of use your fame to both raise the money to fund these organizations, but really to have such a positive effect on so many kids?
Well, I started with one school, and then I saw the impact that I had to those kids. And now I'm in about 20, 30 schools per quarter, and I've seen thousands of kids per year now. And what really hurts, what really wake me up in the morning to go to their school. It's when you see a beautiful kid with a beautiful smile and they're starving.
Mm-hmm.
And the teachers, like, we have to feed them because they don't get fed and they're after school or before schools, and they only have one T-shirts and there's stings and they don't smell too good. And I'm very sensitive about that also. And I asked the teachers and the principal, what can I do to help? Well, we have a food pantry in the back and it's empty. And my wife and I, Sue and I, would try to help them out. We have a system now that we send T-shirts to the kids. And so they have more than one T-shirt. When I give them my Matteau Gold Club T-shirts, the kids could wear it for a few weeks in a row. And they're so proud because they've never been part of a team before. Most likely they will get kicked out of a group because they don't fit in the society. So my Make Your Moment program most likely will try to aim at the kids who doesn't fit in. And we try to make them fit in our program and at schools could benefit after that. Like after the team is built, they can go out to the cafeteria and sit with someone because in the past they would never sit with someone.
You're obviously a very considerate man in terms of the way you think about these things, very introspective without question. And I'm going to go back a second because I think this is important. I mentioned Pete Stemkowski at the top. I mean, I could walk into Times Square and ask 100 people who Pete Stemkowski is, and there's a very good chance that nobody knows for a myriad of different reasons. But you think about your goal. We mentioned Valerie Zella-Pukin, but you think about the Howie Rose call, because I don't know how he was able to do it. First of all, I don't know how he knew that you scored the goal because you really couldn't see. I mean, Richter said that he thought he saw it go in and he had the best view in the house. Yeah. And if you go back and watch, there was a second before that puck was over the line, and there was a good second before the crowd realized it as well. But the fact that Howie Rose was able to make what is probably one of the 5 most iconic calls in sports history, that helped you as well. Thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I don't think the Matteau, like my goal was special alone.
Right.
But he made it to a level where no one could imagine. For the last 30 years, I'm walking around and people recognize me because of his call. And because when you look at the replay, Tikkanen was inches away for him to swipe. The puck was going in and he swiped at the same time and he missed it. And if Tikkanen scored, I would have been happy also.
Of course.
And I would have been, I don't know if I'd be sitting here, but Howie, a good friend of mine, he battled cancer a few years ago in 2021. He's doing great. He's back with the Mets. And I just wanted to create something. That's why we're doing something on May 23rd, because time is flying. Like we were talking about before, time is flying. I'm getting older. Howie went through some tough time, and I don't want to wait until someone is gone to acknowledge them. So he's very healthy, but let's do something. My wife is pushing really hard for us to do it because I'm one of the most humble person that you can meet. I didn't want any spotlight, but I'm going to do it because I think the Ranger fans are looking for a good storytell. And we're going to have the panel. We're going to have my best friend on the panel, Pierre Turgeon, is going to be on it. Not because we beat them. Not only we beat them in the first round in 4 straight games, but Pierre, nobody knows about it. Between games 2 and 3 against the Islanders, I was on his boat in Long Island.
Come on.
And no one knows about it. There was no cell phones to prove it, but I was on his boat. And can you imagine if someone would have seen us?
Well,
and would
I'll
have
tell
posted
you,
on TikTok?
listen, I mean, what's interesting is, there were no cell phones back then, but you think, again, not going down this rabbit hole, but the Giants were going to play the Packers in the playoffs, and Odell Beckham and a bunch of guys got on a boat, and I don't know if you remember, very famous picture, and that was the beginning of the end. So to your point, that couldn't happen today because it'd be all over the place. I mean, the callers on WFAN would be like, why the bleep is Stéphane Matteau on Pierre Turgeon? What is he, crazy?
Well, we're talking about players, the new NHL, they all friends. All the Russian players, they all friends, all the French Canadian. So the friendship that I had with Pierre, we were born in the same town. Like we started playing organized hockey since the age of 5. Baseball, we went to the Little League World Series at the age of 12 in Williamsport, and there was only 2 pitchers on the team, myself and Pierre. Pierre's in the Hall of Fame at the Little League World Series, and No, we've been best friends. I moved to Florida with Sue and I. We moved to West Palm Beach because Pierre is there with his family. So I wanted him to be on the panel. And then Adam Gray's another mentor of me growing up as the last 20 years as an alumni. Everyone's when we walk, as an example, when we walk through Madison Square Garden, we have those people who opened the doors for us. And I noticed that Adam would always go left and right. And he knew everyone. He knows everyone at the Garden by their first name, their kid's name. And I asked him one time, how do you know all those people? He goes, Steph, they are human beings. They all part of the same family. And because of his leadership, I started to do the same thing. And it's me going back to the Garden often. I know pretty much everyone by first name, and I'm proud to be part of that group.
Pretty amazing.
To have fun with the fans.
My last question. I typically don't put a lot of emphasis on head coaches, but Mike Keenan was the right guy at the right time. But Mike Keenan is going to wear thin over. He's sort of 2, 3, 4 years, and then he's gone. But he was the right coach at the right time. Remember, the Rangers fired a guy prior and got him in. That's probably a lot of Messier, but that doesn't matter. I only realize now, and I've been watching hockey a long time, but this Ranger team is in large part the same team as last year, tweaks around the edges. But the fact that Peter Laviolette got out of this team what Gerard Gallant could not, I think it speaks to the importance of coaching, system, discipline, all the little bullshit things over the course of the year that lead up to where they are now. Thoughts on that?
100% right. Mike was really hard on us, was really hard on his team. And usually only lasts 3 to 4 years. Daryl Sutter is the same way. Gerard Gallant, he was hard also on different teams. He got fired also in different teams. And Peter also all I can say about Peter is he's one of the most organized coach in the league. I've talked to people in the organization. Once the player come in the morning, on the morning of a game, the game plan is on the wall. The players grab their water, their coffee, and they start reading about the game plan that night. As a player, it's so much fun to to start reading and prepare yourself. And not surprised, he's patient with the players. Remke took a few bad penalties in the playoff, and the very next shift, not to point fingers at any coaches in the past, he would not touch the ice for the rest of the game. And as a player, you feel it. I made a mistake. I'm so sorry. And then they put you in a position to go back on the ice. So the players respect a coach like that, and that's exactly what he's doing this year.
I know Wayne Gretzky. I know Gordie Howe. I know Messier. I mean, I can rattle off 10 names. Connor McDavid is the best hockey player of all time. Thoughts?
Fastest human being with the puck. He is incredible. He is the top. Gretzky wasn't as fast, wasn't as strong. Mario wasn't as fast. They all had something very special. You're talking about 10 of the best players of all time, and McDavid is the fastest. We don't see him, and I don't see him enough because he's on the West Coast. I'm sleeping by 9 o'clock, but the highlights that Draisaitl also, two of the best players. They have a lot of people count them out because they haven't won yet. But this year they look very good, and the kid is
he's a freak.
He's a freak.
Yeah, he scored a goal against the Rangers a couple years ago that are every highlight reel, and he's doing it against. He's making guys in today's NHL look like beer leaguers on a Saturday afternoon, which is amazing if you think about that.
He's like Bobby Orr in the 70s.
Yes.
Bobby Orr, never seen him play, but people keep telling me he was the fastest player. He was like playing against Pee-wees. He made everyone look bad. And that's a talent. That's what McDavid is doing on the fastest game. The game of hockey grown so much. Everyone's faster, stronger. And he's in the different league. He's a freak. I like that word.
Well, listen, and you know what, Steph? You're not a freak. You're a legend. And I can speak on behalf of every frickin' Ranger fan out there. You hold a place in our hearts that will never, it might be matched. Hopefully, it's never going to be replaced. So thank you for everything you've done for the organization, and thank you for everything you're doing for young people around the area. Thanks for joining us.
Appreciate it, guys. Thank you very much.
Steph.
Thank you.